Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we have a new life story. Let's begin.
She left me $15 million. And the first thing my family said wasn't congratulations or even, are you okay? It was, you know what God would want you to do with that. I still remember the smell of the church that day. Cold incense, sweat coats, old wood, everything soaked in that solemn fake calm families pretend to wear when someone dies. But Aunt Cora wasn't just someone. She was the only person in my entire life who ever gave me the feeling of being truly seen. Not judged, not evaluated, just seen. She'd been sick for months, but none of us knew how sick, or how fast the end would come. She died on a Monday, alone in her townhouse in Worthington. I was the one who found her. I still hear the silence in that house, still see the untouched tea on her kitchen table, still feel the envelope she'd left on the hall chair, addressed to me, as if she knew it had to be me who walked in first. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. The real shock came 1 week later, when her lawyer, a woman named Deborah Fink, called me into her office and read the will. I was the sole heir. Every cent, every asset, her house, her shares in some pharmaceutical startup I'd never even heard of, her retirement accounts, the land she'd quietly bought back near our family's old farm in Circleville. All of it. $15 million. Fully itemized. Deborah watched me like she expected me to faint. But I didn't. I just sat there, holding the folder, letting the number bleed into my brain. 15 million. I made $73,000 a year, working full-time as a pharmacist. My student debt wasn't even paid off yet. I've been wearing the same winter coat for 5 years. And now I had more money than everyone in my family combined. I walked out of that office, and the first thing I did was call my mother. Maybe I wanted her to say something kind. Maybe I thought she'd be proud. Maybe, stupidly, I thought she'd cry and say Aunt Cora always loved me best. What I got instead was, Emmy, you need to come over. Now. Your father and I have prayed on this. I should have known. I drove to their house, the same brick colonial I grew up in, a house full of rules and guilt and laminated Bible quotes on the fridge. Joshua was already there. My older brother, Father Joshua Monroe. Full collar, calm face, and those same empty eyes I'd learned to read like a thermometer for danger. Mom sat me down on the couch. Joshua stood behind her like a sentinel. We know this is overwhelming, she began, hands folded like she was delivering a sermon. But money like that, it's not just a gift, it's a test. I didn't respond. Joshua spoke next. Aunt Cora was generous, but we all know she didn't have the strongest discernment in her final years. She was clear, I said. She was sentimental, Mom corrected. She loved you. That's not in question. But you have to ask yourself, what would God want? And then it came. They wanted me to donate it all. Not just to any cause, but to Joshua's parish, to his diocese, to fund missions and faith expansion and facilities maintenance, which, when translated into real-world language, meant building a brand new complex 3 blocks from the cathedral and naming it after our family. $15 million. And they looked at me like it was self-evident that I'd hand it over. I felt the folder in my lap. Cora's signature still fresh. Her voice in my memory. Don't let them shame you into disappearing, Emmy. That's what they always wanted. Joshua clasped my hand like a priest hearing confession. This is your chance to do something sacred. And I said nothing. Because inside me, something ancient was waking up. Something that had waited my entire life to stop apologizing. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the tiny bedroom of my rental, the same one I'd been in for 6 years, staring at the water stain on the ceiling like it might spell out instructions. I didn't tell anyone what I was going to do. I didn't tell my boyfriend, or my coworker Sasha, or even Deborah. I just let the silence grow teeth. By morning, the calls had begun. It started with Mom, then Dad, then Joshua, Then a new number. Someone from the Diocese Office of Strategic Growth, whatever that meant. They left a message about exploring structured stewardship. Structured stewardship. They were already dividing the money. I shut off my phone. Instead, I drove back to Worthington, to Cora's house. Deborah had left the keys with me. I opened the door and stood in the threshold like it was holy ground. The house smelled like lemon wood polish and clean cotton. Nothing had changed. Except me. I walked straight to her office, noticed the framed certificate of stock I hadn't even realized was real before, saw the dusty bank box labeled Circleville Deed, and the crisp, unopened envelopes from the hedge fund where most of the assets were tucked. But then, on the far side of her desk, in a thin file I almost missed, I saw something else. A letter, addressed to her lawyer, dated 6 weeks before her death. If anything happens to me and my family disputes the will, I want Emily protected. I fear her brother and parents may try to manipulate her using religious pressure. I am of sound mind. I have made this decision freely. Signed in ink, witnessed, notarized. I sat there for 10 minutes, holding that paper like armor. Then I took photos of it. Then I made the first real decision of my life. Deborah called the next morning. She said, "They've contacted us." I didn't ask who, I already knew. "The diocese legal team," she continued. "They're asking to review the estate paperwork. Not formally contesting, not yet, but they're probing. Soft pressure." What do they want? They want to know if the assets can be redirected through a charitable trust. They're claiming Cora would have supported ecclesiastical development. Apparently, your brother's been presenting her as a longtime donor. "She never gave them a dime," I said. "She gave them something more valuable," Deborah replied, sighing. "A reputation they could twist." That afternoon, I got the email. From Joshua. Not even a call. "Emily, I don't want to escalate anything, but the bishop and I agreed that the most faithful course of action would be to create a sacred trust in Cora's name. That way, your soul and hers can be at peace. We've drafted the paperwork. If you sign and return by Friday, this can all move forward without burdening you further." I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Deborah. But the real bomb dropped 4 days later. It came from Caitlin, Cora's old neighbor, who worked nights as a hospital clerk and spent weekends cleaning houses to cover her son's speech therapy. She texted me at 11:23 p.m. "Hey, weird question. Did your aunt ever talk about switching lawyers?" I called her immediately. She said something to me about how she didn't trust the church anymore, that someone tried to get her to sign new estate papers. I thought it was just health stuff. But now, seeing what's happening, "Who came to her?" I asked. "I didn't see them, but she said your brother brought a priest to dinner, and after they left, she was upset. She said she'd rewritten everything the next day. She said, 'They thought I was blind, but I see better than all of them.'" The breath left my lungs. "They'd tried to rewrite the will before she died." I met Deborah the next morning in a quiet conference room off her downtown office. She wore black and gray like a barrister in mourning and laid out the full game board. "If they did attempt to coerce a will change, we need evidence. Otherwise, it's just hearsay. What about Caitlin? She's a start. But if we could find anything, text messages, emails, medical records showing stress from that meeting, it strengthens our defense." "Our defense?" I asked. She gave me a look. "They're going to file. It's not a question of if, it's when. You're sitting on $15 million and refusing to bend. They'll come after you in the courts, or the press." I nodded slowly. I already knew she was right. That night, I opened every drawer in Cora's house, every notebook, every email archive. I sorted through stacks of old church bulletins and found notes scribbled in the margins. One caught my eye. 211. Joshua brought Father Glenn, pushed hard, said Jesus gave up everything, said I'd be cursed if I withheld, asked for new will. I told them no, then I changed the locks. Changed the locks. I checked the door. Sure enough, the lock hardware is new, barely worn. The date is less than a month before she died. I photographed everything. And just like that, the doubt I had carried my entire life about whether I was exaggerating, overreacting, uncharitable, dissolved. They had tried to steal from her. And now they were trying to steal from me. But I had a voice this time. And this time, I wasn't going to be quiet. The official lawsuit arrived by courier on a Thursday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through medical bills I hadn't even paid off yet, pre-diagnosis imaging, out-of-pocket dental, a broken wrist from last year's car accident, when the doorbell rang. The man didn't even look at me. He confirmed my name, handed me a thick envelope, and turned back toward his truck in a single, trained movement, like he did this 10 times a day. In the Court of Common Pleas, Franklin County, Ohio. Petition to contest the last will and testament of Cora J. Monroe, filed by Reverend Joshua Monroe and Mr. and Mrs. Richard and Claire Monroe, represented by Caldwell, Byrne, and Wells, LLP, under the auspices of the Diocese of Columbus Legal Affairs Division. The language was clean, sanitized. Undue influence, mental instability, lack of clarity at the time of execution. They were claiming Cora had been misled and coerced by me, her only living next of kin. I sat very still for several minutes. Then I called Deborah. She'd already received a courtesy copy from the firm. It's what we expected. They want to freeze the estate, stall distribution, drag you into settlement negotiations, and drain your will before you can touch a cent. Can they do it? They'll try, but we're not defenseless. She paused, then added, "You still want to fight?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought about the nights Cora and I sat on her porch, drinking sweet tea and swatting mosquitoes. The way she'd tell stories from her nursing days. The way she once said, "If you ever get money, Emmy, watch what changes. Not just who asks, but how they ask." I thought about Joshua's voice, polished like a sermon, telling me what God would want. Then I said, "Yes." We filed our answer to the petition within the week. Deborah included sworn affidavits from Caitlin and 2 other neighbors, screenshots of Cora's journal entries, a full medical evaluation confirming no cognitive decline at the time of the will's execution, and Cora's own letter warning about religious coercion. I thought that would slow them down. It didn't. Within 10 days, my parents had gone public. They gave an interview to a local Catholic magazine, calling Cora's will a tragedy of misdirection and claiming I was a sweet girl lost to secular temptations. Sweet girl. As if I was 16. As if this were a rebellion. I didn't know about the article until one of my pharmacy clients, a nun, left it on the counter. "I'm sure it's not true," she said gently, avoiding my eyes. I didn't respond. I just rang her up and kept my jaw tight until the door closed behind her. When I got home, I read the article. The part that hit hardest wasn't what they said about me. It was this line. "It is deeply saddening that Cora's final years were spent estranged from her true spiritual family." I wanted to scream. Cora had never left the church, but she'd left them. She stopped attending Joshua's services when he began preaching about submission and sacrifice, like it was a code for obedience to him. And now they were rewriting her entire legacy, like she'd been some lost old woman who accidentally tripped into kindness and needed to be rescued from her own will. Deborah arranged a hearing to try and lift the temporary freeze on the estate. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, parishioners, old family friends who hadn't spoken to me in years. The diocese sent 2 attorneys. Joshua came in full color, rosary prominently displayed. I wore a navy suit and flats. The judge was a woman named Miriam Harlan, sharp-eyed and clearly unimpressed by theatrics. She asked both sides to limit rhetoric and stick to facts. Deborah laid out our case methodically. Signed will, notarized, properly witnessed, no evidence of incapacity, medical clearance, clear intention, prior pattern of behavior, recordings, notes, and written correspondence. The other side argued spiritual manipulation and isolation from trusted spiritual leaders. That's when Joshua stood and gave a sworn statement claiming Cora had been increasingly confused, that she'd once referred to him by the wrong name, and that he feared she'd been preyed upon by anti-church influences. I watched him lie. He said it calmly, with eyes that glistened. He said it the way he used to say, "This hurts me more than it hurts you," back when we were kids and he held my wrists against the floor to teach me about respect. When he finished, he looked at me like he expected me to cry. I didn't. I looked straight ahead while Deborah calmly requested the admission of video file C3 into evidence. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a monitor switched on. Cora, sitting in her kitchen, recorded 3 weeks before she died. The date and timestamp confirmed. In her voice, clear and firm, I know what I'm doing. I'm leaving my money to Emily because she's the only one who ever cared without expecting something back. I've told my family that. They don't like it. But it's my choice, my money, my life. Silence followed. You could hear the courtroom breathe. The judge asked if there were objections. The diocese's lawyers mumbled something about context, but it was weak. The judge didn't rule that day. She said she'd issue a written decision within 30 days. But the damage was already done. Joshua stormed out of the courtroom without speaking to me. My mother wouldn't look at me. My father stayed behind and gave me a look that could have been disappointment or maybe defeat. I walked home through slushy sidewalks and late March wind, feeling nothing and everything at once. When I got in, I turned off my phone. I sat on the floor with Leo, Cora's old Labrador, who was getting slow but still found the energy to rest his head on my knee. I whispered, "They're not going to win." He huffed, softly, like he believed me. But I didn't sleep that night either, because I knew what was coming next. They weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. I expected silence after the hearing. What I got was surveillance. It started small. Someone posted a photo of me online, leaving the courthouse, clutching my coat collar, looking like a villain straight out of a scandal. The caption read, "This is the girl who stole her aunt's fortune. $15 million. Refuses to share with the church." The photo was shared across 3 parish Facebook groups and circulated in private message chains I couldn't access but kept hearing about. Then someone created a burner account and sent me screenshots. My face, my name, my job. Then came the notes. Slipped into the mailbox of the pharmacy where I worked. Taped to the windshield of my car. Folded into the gate of Cora's old property. "You'll regret what you've done. God sees greed. He gives and he can take away." I reported it to the police. They filed a report but didn't do much more. No threats of violence, they said. Just moral persuasion. I called Deborah. "They're trying to isolate you," she said. Standard tactic. Keep your head down. We're close. But I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. I lost 4 pounds in 10 days. I could feel it in the way my jeans sagged and the hollowness behind my eyes in the mirror. The lawsuit hadn't just paused my life. It had weaponized everything that used to make me feel normal. So when Rachel Carmichael reached out, I almost didn't respond. She was a journalist, freelance, investigative background, said she'd been tipped off by someone inside the diocesan office who didn't agree with how things were being handled. She told me over coffee, it's more than just inheritance. They're using your aunt's estate as a pilot test for a model of spiritual asset realignment. Your case is the first. The first what? First legal attempt to seize personal inheritance posthumously by claiming moral obligation to the church. No precedent yet. That's why they're throwing everything at you. If they win, they'll try again. I stared at her. You're telling me this is a blueprint? They picked you because they thought you'd fold. A single woman, no legal background, no church ties anymore, no public voice. I took a long breath. And what happens if I speak? Rachel smiled faintly. Then you stop being a case file. You become a story. I agreed to the interview. We sat down for 3 hours and I told her everything. From the first moment my mother said, "We prayed about it," to the day I found the hidden letter in Cora's desk. I gave her photos, timestamps, email records. She verified it all. Her article dropped on a Wednesday. Faith, Fortune, and the Fight for a Dead Woman's Will by Rachel Carmichael. Within 24 hours, it had 2.7 million views. National news picked it up. Morning shows requested interviews. Deborah fielded requests from legal podcasts, women's rights panels, even a secular ethics symposium in Chicago. For the first time since the hearing, the story wasn't just theirs. It was mine. That weekend, I got a call from someone I hadn't expected. Sister Claire Donovan, a nun, elderly, sharp, had worked with Cora in hospice care for 2 years. She left me a voicemail. "Emily, I'm sorry it's taken me so long. I thought staying quiet would protect her memory. I see now it's protecting the wrong people. Call me back. I have something you need." We met in a chapel office near Delaware, Ohio. She wore a gray habit and orthopedic shoes and moved like a woman who had long outgrown the need for permission. She handed me a thumb drive. Cora recorded conversations. My breath caught. After Joshua and Father Glenn came to pressure her, she started using a recorder. She was scared. She asked me to keep the files in case anything ever happened. Deborah's hands trembled when I handed it over. What we found on those files turned the case upside down. Recording February 11th, 4:47 p.m. Joshua. Cora, this isn't about control. It's about eternity. Do you really want to face the Lord having withheld what could have built his kingdom? Cora. I don't think God needs a cathedral with marble floors to know where my heart is. Father Glenn. Your niece is young. She can't guide you properly. The church can. Cora. She listens. That's more than I can say for the rest of you. Joshua. You're making a mistake. Cora. I've made it, and I'm keeping it. Silence. Then the sound of a chair scraping, footsteps, and the soft click of a door. Deborah submitted the recordings under seal. The court scheduled a new hearing within 5 days. I arrived to see Joshua flanked by 3 attorneys and a new priest I didn't recognize. His face looked harder now. The calm was gone. The judge entered, stone-faced. She'd heard the tapes. She issued a partial ruling. Petition to contest is dismissed with prejudice. Estate to be executed as written. No evidence supports claims of mental instability or undue influence. Executor is instructed to proceed with full authority. My knees nearly buckled. I turned to Deborah. She just nodded. It was over. The money was mine. That night, I drove to Cora's old house. I sat on her porch. The lights were off, the yard overgrown. I watched the shadows flicker through the slats of the railing. I didn't feel victory. I felt rage. That it had come to this. That they'd rather destroy her name than let me inherit without shame. That they tried to sanctify theft in the name of devotion. I opened her old journal. The last page was blank, except for a single line, written in ink I recognized. God sees everything, but so do we. I closed the book. $15 million. A fortune. But the real inheritance, knowing that for once in my life, I hadn't bent.
After the judgment, the world changed. But my family didn't. The courthouse ruled in my favor. The estate was released. The accounts were unfrozen. $15 million now legally sat under my name in an account that hadn't existed 2 months prior. Deborah handled the transfers. My phone buzzed daily with offers from financial advisors, charity foundations, real estate agents. I ignored most of them. The only thing I knew for certain was that I wasn't going to spend a dime. Not yet. I needed space, silence, air. So I took what little vacation time I had, packed a duffel, and drove 3 hours southeast into the hills, staying in a rented cabin on a private plot surrounded by woods, far from parish bells and Facebook gossip. I left my phone inside, built fires, took long walks, and let the anxiety finally start to uncurl from my spine. But on the 4th night, just as I began to believe peace was possible, I got a call I couldn't ignore. It was Deborah. They've appealed. I didn't even ask who. Of course it was my parents. Of course it was Joshua. They can't win, I said quietly. They won't, but that's not the point anymore. The appeal won't overturn the decision. It's a delay tactic to pressure you into settling. And there's more. She hesitated. The bishop has released a public statement. He's calling the verdict a temporary injustice and says true believers must remain steadfast. The words were cold, but the implication was red hot. They weren't just challenging me in court now. They were trying to rally their followers, their tithers, their narrative. I'm tired, I said. I know. But what I didn't say out loud, what I only admitted to myself once I ended the call and stepped outside into the quiet dark, was that I wasn't just tired. I was done. Done hoping for reconciliation, done tiptoeing around the sanctified ego of a brother who thought spiritual titles made him morally bulletproof, done measuring my actions against the expectations of people who would have burned me at the stake if the law allowed it. I wasn't going back to who I was. Not ever. 2 days later, I met with Deborah and signed the documents to establish the Cora J. Monroe Foundation. It wasn't a charity tied to a parish. It wasn't a trust that funneled funds back into the church. It was independent, registered under a secular nonprofit status. Its mission was simple: protect financial autonomy and legal rights of women manipulated by religious institutions. The seed money? $15 million. I didn't keep a cent. And the backlash was immediate. Within a week, my parents released a statement claiming I desecrated Cora's legacy. Parish leaders accused me of dividing the flock. One religious blogger called me Judas in scrubs. But Rachel Carmichael picked up the story again. She published a second expose, this time naming the patterns. Churches pressuring elderly congregants to change their wills under spiritual duress, then framing objections as attacks on faith. The website crashed from traffic. By month's end, over 3,000 women had submitted private testimonies. Hundreds of the mentioned things I recognized. Phrases like, God will bless you for letting go. Think of the kingdom. Be a good daughter of the church. But most chilling of all, more than a dozen mentioned Joshua's name. I stared at the screen, at that list of messages. I hadn't just fought for Cora's money. I had accidentally cracked open a vault of other people's stolen legacies. I moved back into Cora's house that spring. It needed repairs. I hired local contractors, women-run firms wherever I could. I restored the garden bed she'd let go wild and planted lavender in the corners. I found her old rocking chair in the attic and put it back on the porch. Neighbors stopped by, some awkwardly, some warmly, some just to say, I always liked her, and then shuffle away. I never knew what to say back. I wasn't doing any of this for them. But the house felt like her. It felt like safety. Sometimes I found myself walking into her old room and just sitting. No reason, no goal, just stillness. She was gone, and I missed her with the kind of ache that doesn't fade. It just shifts shape. But I also felt her. Every time I said no to guilt, every time I stood up when they tried to pull me back down, every time I remembered that her love didn't require performance or purity, just presence. The final message came in June. An envelope, no return address. Inside, a letter. Joshua's handwriting. You have made a public mockery of our family. You have betrayed your calling. You may win in the world's eyes, but heaven remembers. No apology, no regret, just condemnation. I didn't respond. I folded the letter in half, placed it in Cora's old recipe box, and tucked it between her biscuit instructions and a stained card that read, Grace is what you choose when power is easy. Then I opened the windows, let the summer wind in, let the whole world breathe. Let them watch. Because I had 15 million reasons to keep quiet, and not one of them was stronger than my voice. I didn't expect peace. Not really. Not after what I'd learned. Not after what I'd seen unravel from the inside out. But what I didn't expect was the quiet. There were no more lawyers, no new lawsuits, no late-night calls, no appeals filed. The judge had signed the final documents dissolving the contest, affirming the legality of the foundation, and authorizing the full transfer of Cora's assets to the organization's operational accounts. I sat in Deborah's office while she slid the final folder across the table. This is the end, she said softly. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like crossing into something I hadn't had words for before, a version of adulthood where I didn't flinch before speaking, didn't weigh my sentences against imagined disapproval, didn't ask myself what God would think, because I finally knew. Whatever divine light there was in the world, it didn't live in guilt or in Joshua's eyes or in the rules printed on a bulletin. It lived in Cora. It lived in the kindness she showed me when no one else did. It lived in the part of me that said no again and again, even when my voice shook. One night in July, I visited my parents. They hadn't spoken to me since the verdict, hadn't acknowledged the foundation, hadn't even sent a text. But I needed to say something. Their porch light was on. The living room window glowed, but the shades were drawn. I stood on the steps with the cicadas humming behind me and knocked. Mom answered. She looked thinner, older. Her mouth opened in a perfect O of surprise, like she couldn't believe I'd dare show up. I didn't wait for her to speak. I'm not here to argue, I said.
I just wanted to tell you something." She crossed her arms, but didn't close the door. "I'm done letting your version of faith control my life. I loved Cora. I'm proud of what I did, and I don't owe you forgiveness." A beat of silence. Then, "You're proud of dragging your brother through the mud?" she snapped. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I didn't drag him. He walked willingly. From inside, I heard my father mutter something, but he didn't come to the door. My mother's voice dropped. "We raised you better than this." I nodded slowly. "No, you raised me to be quiet. Cora raised me to be brave." Then I turned and walked away. She didn't call after me. A week later, I received an invitation. A national ethics conference in Washington wanted me to speak on stage in front of hundreds of attendees. Not just about inheritance or legal rights, but about the emotional toll of spiritual coercion, the entanglement of gender and guilt in religious families, the war between love and control. I almost said no. But then I thought about the other names. The women who had written in, the ones who hadn't fought back, the ones who'd believed they were wrong to want what was rightfully theirs. So I booked a flight. I stood on that stage in a navy dress under hot lights and said everything out loud. About the will, about the pressure, about the way people use God as a mouthpiece for manipulation, and about the woman who taught me that love doesn't demand sacrifice, it protects it. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then, applause. But it wasn't the clapping that stayed with me. It was the woman in the front row, gray hair, soft cardigan, who stood and wiped tears from her eyes. When I got home, there was a letter waiting. Not from my family, not from the church. From Caitlin, the neighbor, the one who'd been there at the beginning, who'd testified even though she was scared. Inside, a photograph. It was me and Cora on her back porch. She was holding a glass of iced tea and laughing. I was 16, sunburned, barefoot, smiling like I didn't know yet how the world would try to take me apart. Caitlin had written just one sentence on the back. She was never confused. She was never alone. I put the photo on my bookshelf, right beside Cora's recipe box. Life didn't become magical. I still had to pay my taxes, still had to deal with plumbing in the old house, still had days where I wondered what would have happened if I'd just signed the papers, handed everything to Joshua, and gone back to being the invisible daughter. But on the whole, the quiet was good. The foundation grew. We hired staff. We funded 3 legal defense cases by December. And on Cora's birthday, we planted an oak tree behind the house, just outside her old kitchen window. No plaque, no monument, just something real, growing, stubborn and strong. Just like her. Some nights, I still sit on the porch with Leo and watch the sun fall over the trees. I think about the girl I used to be, about the woman Cora must have seen when I couldn't. And I promise her, they didn't win. They never will.